So for project 2, what are we looking for? What am I looking for, I guess, since I'll be the one correcting your papers, reviewing your papers and providing some input and whatnot. And a little bit of this I've kind of showed you, and again, I think were it me, I would export this data to an Excel worksheet, but I'm gonna pick just one thing today. I'll maybe get into some other things as I go along. But as I was reviewing a little bit the WD40 stock, and I've just picked it because nobody else had picked it, and kind of a small little company with a good focus, right? And I picked up on, and you guys, as I was talking about it with some of the other things, I said, look at that, they had a big jump, in non-current liabilities, long-term debt, right? And I come up here, total financial liabilities non-current, and there's that big jump. It's $60 million, which is pretty close to what's down there. And when I see things like that, I wonder why, and that becomes a part of my analysis. And so I want to take a look at it and what happened. And generally, the way to do that, sometimes I can just put that information actually into a search engine, and especially with some mergers and acquisitions, you'll find some news articles that are about that, and that's fine. There's a perfectly good source, but generally I like to go to the annual report. And I'm going to tell you that this gets hard. There's just no getting around it. It gets to be kind of difficult. It takes a little bit of research. You got to do a little bit of looking and finding and reading and all those horrible things that we hate to do. But it started off first. I had to figure out, well, what year was this? Okay. Well, the year that long-term debt really jumped up was in 2020, and so I want to go and I just searched annual reports WD40, and it takes me to their site. There's a site that's like annualreports.com. It's horrible. Stay away from that. And in my case, it was maybe I can go back to it. When I just did a search. I came down here, investorwd40.com. Great. Okay. When I see investor, something like that, investor dot, and then the company, that's oftentimes the best place to find these things. So I clicked on that, brought up the WD40 annual report. Boom. Click on that. Look at that. I could go back. Gosh. And they even had archived one. So, but I clicked on that and it opened it up in a PDF. Okay. I'm going to make note here that I got to come down right to there because I've highlighted that. So I'm on page 122, but I'm going to go up and show you a couple of things that you might run into, and that's certainly the case here. So I've got WD40. When I read through the first part of this, you might find some good information actually in this first part, right? This is the message from their chairman, and one page, and probably their CFO. I'm not sure. Okay. And you might find some interesting information in those, and that's fine. Okay. What I'm really looking for though is the 10K, and in this case they've combined. In some places, some companies will and some companies will not, but they've combined their proxy statement, it's called, which is basically the call for people to come and come to their annual meeting, right? Shareholders to come to their annual meeting. This stuff's here is kind of interesting because you can look at this and get some, look at that. Their gross margin, been on a little bit of a decrease, right? Sales per employee, drop off in 2020. Why do you suppose that was? Weighted shares outstanding, so they're slowly buying back stock. It's kind of interesting. Net sales, though, and earnings per share, they had a big year in 2018, and then it kind of, Okay, so anyhow, those are some nice things to look at, graph, but here's the table of contents. So the proxy statement, the annual report on Form 10K, and that's really what I want to look at. But that was way down here on about page 60, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay. So I finally got to this Form 10K, and that's kind of cool. I scrolled down a little bit because they'll all just about have this table of contents, and in that table of contents, and this will take you to, the information that you really want. And this gets to be kind of lengthy at times, right? Look at that. I still got 76 pages left of stuff. This only says 39, and oftentimes what you're going to find, or where you're going to find a lot of this, is the management's discussion and analysis of um, financial condition and results of operations. And especially as you come up here, that gives you some good stuff. You might want to read through that, not might, and you probably more importantly for you guys in the past year, unless again you see some things that are a little bit interesting. This top part for me, okay, when I went through it, it was all a bunch of income statement stuff, and that's great. I want to know about their income statement stuff, but the thing that jumped out at me there was on the balance sheet, right? It had to do with their debt and why that increased, and that was on page 122. And I'm jumping to it now. I'll come back and show you some other things, maybe for some other companies. 122 is actually some notes, some supplements. So it took me a while. Okay, I had to do some reading and whatnot, and really I kind of kept scrolling through it. Oh, credit agreement, debt, note 8, debt. Okay, and that's what I was looking at, was debt, right? And I kind of had to read through a decent amount of this, and I finally got to this, and it says, and I highlighted it, right? During the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 2020, the company repaid $5 million in short-term borrowings. So that's not what I was looking for, right? But they drew an additional $90 million in U.S. dollars, which included an $80 million draw, okay, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, although the company did not have any anticipated needs for this additional liquidity, the company decided to draw as a result of the pandemic. They repaid $55 million of it, okay, but there you go. So 90, 55, so there is, 35? Actually, if I read up here a little bit too, they also issued about $20 million in bonds, right, that you or I could buy. And so I'm getting pretty darn close to that 60 million, okay? It turns out normally I would call these kinds of revolving credit agreements short-term, okay? But they classify it under long-term borrowings. They've got this revolving credit facility, and that's probably because it's set up for more than 1 year, right? It allows them to take advances on it or drawdowns on that throughout the year. So, here you go. They were at 42, boom, jumped up to 95, and right there is just about your $60 million increase. Okay, I'm off a couple million. I'm not going to get too worried about that. When I figured out what the 60 million is, the couple million's probably some small details, some things this or that they paid back or didn't pay back, different things like that. So I figured out what the biggest part of that was, and so that's something that should be in when I'm talking about the balance sheet. If I'm doing those things, and I would say, oh, here was something that happened in 2020 in their balance sheet that stuck out, and that was an increase in debt of about 60 million, long-term debt of about $60 million. What that $60 million do? If I jump back to here, it's kind of interesting to their balance sheet, okay? Oh, guess what? They had a pretty good-sized increase, 30 million in total cash, okay? So it gave them the liquidity, and that's what they were looking for. Inventories increased a little bit, accounts receivable increased a little bit, but total current, up about 40 million. So of that 60 million, about 40 million of that just went right to current assets. Okay, the other 20 million I could search through and find out, they got some properties, building improvements, things like that. And again, we could go into great length about that, and we don't have enough room to go into great length about that. So we've kind of figured out the basics of it, and it's enough that we can write about and talk about one of those major things that happened with this company in a particular year. Okay, you're going to have some of those things probably in your company, so be on the lookout for those, and those are the types of things that I'll spot, when I look at each and everybody's company. So a little brief look at the things that I want you to be looking at to analyze. I'll do a couple more of these. I'll do a few more of these as we get closer to your final paper being due. I might even pick some of your companies and just take a look at some things that I'll be looking for. So thanks. Have a good day. Have a good week.